They didn't yell at me. They didn't throw me out. They held a vote. At a family dinner, in my brother's own restaurant, my parents, my sister, and a few relatives raised their hands and decided I was no longer part of the family. And the worst part? They thought it would scare me into coming back. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 33 years old. By day, I work in corporate finance, risk analysis, restructuring, numbers most people avoid looking at too closely. I'm the person companies call when something is quietly falling apart behind the scenes and no one wants to admit it yet. I never imagined I'd one day apply those same skills to my own family. I'm telling you this story because if you've ever been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who fixes things before anyone else even knows they're broken, then you'll understand how a dinner invitation can turn into a courtroom, and how sometimes the calmest person at the table is the one who's finally done. It started with a text from my brother. Family dinner, Sunday, restaurants closed, just us. That alone should have warned me. My brother, David, doesn't close his restaurant unless there's a reason. The place is his identity. Exposed brick walls, warm hanging lights, reclaimed wood tables he insists he sanded himself. Framed magazine covers near the bar, Parker and Sons, the heart of the neighborhood. The name always makes me smile in a tight, ironic way. Because, technically, I helped build it. Just not in the way people see. I arrived early. I always arrive early. When you're the dependable one, punctuality becomes a reflex. The air inside the restaurant smelled faintly of garlic and lemon polish. Chairs were arranged around one long wooden table in the center of the room, like some medieval council meeting disguised as Sunday dinner. My parents were already there. My dad sat at the head of the table out of habit, though everyone knows David runs things now. My mom was smoothing the edge of her napkin the way she does when she's anxious but pretending not to be. My younger sister, Lily, offered me a small smile, soft, apologetic, unreadable. A couple of extended relatives I hadn't expected were there too. That was the second warning sign. Emily, my mom said, in that tone that tries to sound warm but lands somewhere careful. You made it. Of course I made it. I slid into a chair near the end of the table. Not because anyone told me to. Because that's where I always seem to end up present, but slightly peripheral. Close enough to help, far enough to be observed. Dinner started normally. Wine was poured. Bread was passed. David made a comment about a new catering contract. My dad laughed too loudly. Lily asked about my job. And when I started explaining a project I was working on, David cut in with, "Still saving corporations from themselves?" There was an edge to it. A hint of accusation disguised as humor. "Something like that," I said. What I didn't say was, "I've been saving more than corporations." Halfway through the main course, David pushed his chair back. The scrape of wood against concrete echoed through the empty restaurant. It was loud enough that everyone stopped chewing. He stood up slowly, hands braced on the table like he was about to give a speech at a wedding. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. "We've been talking," he said, glancing at our parents before looking directly at me. "About how things have been." My stomach tightened, but my face stayed neutral. Years in corporate meetings have trained me well. Never react too soon. Let the other person reveal their hand first. "And?" I asked lightly. He cleared his throat. "We took a vote." The word didn't belong in a family conversation. It sounded procedural, official, cold. "We voted," he continued, "and we've decided that if you don't want to act like family, then you're not family." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Then I saw my mother's eyes drop to the table. My father nodded once, stiffly. One of the relatives shifted in their seat. Lily didn't look at me at all. And then, like they were applauding a brave announcement at a company town hall, there was clapping. Soft, hesitant, but real. My chest went cold. Not hot, not furious, cold. Like someone had opened a freezer door inside me. 10 years. 10 years of covering gaps. 10 years of wiring money at midnight. 10 years of answering calls that started with, "I hate to ask, but..." And this was the meeting they called when I finally started saying no. I set my fork down carefully. Precision matters in moments like this. Small movements tell people whether you're about to explode or not. David folded his arms. You've been distant, Emily. You barely come around. You act like you're above all this, like we're some burden you tolerate. A burden. I almost laughed. Instead, I took a slow breath. So this is an intervention? I asked. It's a reality check, he shot back. You don't get to pull away and still expect to be treated like you're part of this family. The irony of that sentence almost took my breath away. I looked around the table. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My dad stared at his wineglass like it held the right answer. Lily's fingers twisted a strand of hair around and around. No one spoke up. No one said, "This is too far." That's when I understood something important. This wasn't impulsive. You don't organize a vote overnight. This had been discussed, framed, agreed upon. They didn't think they were hurting me. They thought they were correcting me. I felt the old instinct rising, the one that tells me to smooth things over. Apologize. Offer to come by more often. Reassure everyone that I don't think I'm better than them. Reassure them that I still care. Because I do care. That's the cruelest part. I've always cared. But caring had turned into compliance. And compliance had turned into expectation. David leaned forward. We're tired of feeling judged, he said. You come in here with your spreadsheets, and your tone and your advice. You act like we're irresponsible. Irresponsible. The word rang in my ears. Who covered payroll the first year the restaurant was open? Who paid the hospital when Mom's insurance didn't? Who co-signed the expansion loan because the bank said David's credit history wasn't strong enough? But this wasn't about facts. It was about control. They wanted the version of me who fixed things quietly. The one who absorbed stress so they didn't have to. The one who didn't ask for acknowledgement. And when I started pulling back, protecting my time, my money, my peace, they interpreted it as abandonment. I rested my hands in my lap to steady them. So, I said calmly, you voted me out. David nodded. We did. Something inside me shifted then. Not a snap, not a crack, a shift, like a weight sliding off center. I reached down beside my chair. Because I hadn't come unprepared. When you work in risk analysis, you learn something early. Never walk into a room where you're the topic without knowing the numbers. My fingers brushed the edge of a thick navy blue folder. I lifted it slowly and placed it on the table between us. The sound it made soft cardboard against wood was almost gentle. David's confident expression flickered. For the first time that night, he looked unsure. So that's it? I asked quietly. You held a vote. It's done, he said. I slid the folder toward him. Then I guess, I replied, meeting his eyes. You won't be needing this anymore. He hesitated before opening it. By the third page, his smile was gone. And by the fifth, he started to shake. And that's when dinner stopped being about whether I was still family, and started being about what family had cost me. By the third page, the color had drained from David's face. By the fifth, his fingers weren't steady anymore. He flipped back to the beginning as if maybe the numbers would rearrange themselves into something smaller if he stared at them long enough. What is this? He demanded, but his voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. I didn't answer right away. I let him look. I let all of them look. The first page was simple, clean, no emotion. Just a structured timeline stretching back 10 years, each entry color-coded, date, description, amount, status, a system I knew well, the same structure I used in my professional life when I had to walk executives through the anatomy of their own financial denial. Only this time, the company was my family. At the bottom of the page, bolded and impossible to ignore, was the total. 17,400 yuan. That number had once lived quietly inside my laptop. It had existed as private reassurance proof that I wasn't imagining things, that the pattern I felt wasn't exaggerated in my head. Tonight, it was out in the open, staring back at every person who had just voted me out. You kept track of everything? My father asked slowly. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. I did. David laughed once, sharp and humorless. So you've been building a case against us? The word case hung in the air like an accusation. No, I replied. I've been keeping records. There's a difference. A case assumes malice. Records assume memory can't be trusted. He flipped to the next tab. I had labeled each section clearly: bailouts, payroll coverage, vendor emergencies, personal loans, medical. I watched his jaw tighten as he read the second page, where each temporary transfer had been logged with the message that accompanied it. Just until next Friday. I'll wire it back after the catering payment clears. Don't tell Mom and Dad. They'll freak out. He had written those words. I hadn't changed a single comma. The problem with documentation is that it removes the luxury of reinterpretation. You offered to help, David snapped suddenly, as if the silence itself was accusing him. No one forced you. He was right. No one had physically forced me. But that's not how family obligation works, is it? It's quieter than that. It's in the tone, the pauses, the unspoken understanding that if you're capable, you step in. I offered, I agreed evenly. At first. The first time had been small. A few $1,000s to cover a supplier when an investor backed out unexpectedly. I remember sitting in my apartment that night, transferring the money without hesitation. I'd felt proud, protective, like this was what being an older sister meant. The second time was payroll. David had called me at 1:47 a.m., whispering because he didn't want his staff to hear the panic in his voice. If I don't pay them in the morning, they'll walk, he'd said. I just need a bridge. Bridges became scaffolding. Scaffolding became structure. And at some point, I wasn't helping anymore. I was holding the building up. My mother reached for the page, marked medical. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it. Emily, she said softly, I didn't know it was this much. I know, I replied. Under that tab were statements from the hospital during the year her insurance decided to reclassify certain procedures as non-essential. I had highlighted the charges I'd covered when collections started, calling. I remembered standing in my kitchen with her on speakerphone, promising her she didn't need to worry, promising her I would handle it. I had meant it, I still mean it. I don't regret helping her, but regret and pattern are different things. You never said anything, she whispered. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. Every time I tried, I said carefully, I was told I was overreacting, or that I was keeping score, or that I liked playing the hero. The word hero made David scoff. So that's what this is? He shot back. You want applause? There it was again, the reframing, the shift from evidence to ego. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone calm. No, I want accuracy. That word landed differently. Accuracy doesn't sound dramatic, it sounds reasonable. It's harder to argue with. He flipped to the section labeled promissory note. I watched the moment recognition hit. The date was there. 3 years ago. The night before his grand opening. He had come to my apartment shaking that night. I could still see him pacing between my couch and the window, running his hands through his hair. The bank's hesitating, he'd said. They think I'm too leveraged. If I can show personal backing, they'll release the funds. So I had wired $60,000. And I had printed a promissory note. He'd signed it quickly, almost gratefully. Why would you keep that? He demanded now. Because you asked me not to tell anyone, I said. And because when money and family mix, clarity matters. My father exhaled slowly. This is getting out of hand. Is it? I wanted to ask. Or has it just gotten visible? David flipped faster now, as if speed could undo impact. That's when he reached the section that made him visibly tense. Audio plus message. Inside were printed transcripts of voicemails and texts. I hadn't dramatized them. I hadn't added commentary, just date, time, and exact wording. I'm in the walk-in freezer. I can't breathe. Please tell me you can send something. If you don't cover this today, we're done. I swear I'll pay you back. I just need you one more time. Next to each transcript was a small QR code linking to the original recording. I had debated including that part. It felt almost cruel. But then I remembered the last argument we'd had, when he looked me in the eye and said, You act like we begged you. No one begged you. Memory can be manipulated. Audio cannot. You're weaponizing this, David said, quieter now. No, I replied. I'm protecting myself. There was a long pause after that. The restaurant felt smaller somehow. The warm lights above us suddenly too bright, the air heavy. My sister finally spoke. Emily, why didn't you just say how much this was hurting you? I looked at her. Really looked at her. Because every time I tried, I answered. The conversation turned into how stressed you all were. How hard it was for David. How much pressure Dad was under. There was never room for my exhaustion. That was the truth I hadn't printed. The truth that doesn't fit neatly into folders. David slammed the stack of pages shut. So what? He said. You kept receipts. Congratulations. That doesn't make you family. The word family again. Used like a shield. Like a prize you can revoke. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not even sadness. Just clarity. You held a vote, I reminded him. You made this about belonging. He opened his mouth to respond, but I continued before he could. I didn't bring this to humiliate you. I brought it because you said I've been distant, cold, uninvolved. I needed you to see what involvement has actually looked like. Silence. For a moment, no one knew where to put their eyes. The folder sat between us like a mirror no one wanted to look into. And as David's hand hovered over the remaining pages, the last section he hadn't reached yet, I realized something with almost painful certainty. This conversation wasn't about money. It was about control over the story. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't letting someone else narrate mine. David's hand hovered over the remaining pages like they might burn him. The air in the restaurant felt heavier now, thicker, as if the truth had weight and we were all breathing it in whether we wanted to or not. He could have stopped there. He could have closed the folder and pretended he'd seen enough. But pride has a strange way of pushing people forward when retreat might actually save them. He flipped to the next tab. This one wasn't about scattered transfers or highlighted hospital bills. It was structured differently, cleaner, more deliberate. At the top, in bold, were the words, personal guarantee and liability exposure. His eyes skimmed the heading, and I saw the shift immediately. The defensive anger began to blur into something sharper. Fear. What is this? He asked again, but this time it wasn't an accusation. It was a calculation. I leaned back slightly in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. I didn't want my posture to look aggressive. I didn't want anyone to mistake calm for cruelty. It's a summary of every document my name is attached to in relation to this business, I said evenly. Loans, credit lines, personal guarantees. My father straightened at that word. Guarantees? David flipped through the pages faster now, scanning. His jaw tightened. This is exaggerated. No, I replied quietly. It's exact. 3 years ago, when the restaurant expanded into the event space next door, the bank had hesitated. Revenue projections were optimistic. Debt ratios were stretched. The loan officer had asked for additional security. David didn't have it. I did. A stable income. Clean credit. No outstanding liabilities. I had signed because he looked at me across that polished conference table and said, "You're my sister. If you don't believe in me, who will?" I had believed in him. But belief doesn't erase risk. It just disguises it. You're making it sound like I forced you, David snapped. I'm making it sound like I took responsibility, I corrected gently. Responsibility that you're now saying doesn't count. My mother's eyes darted between us. Emily, sweetheart, no one is saying it doesn't count. David didn't look at her. This isn't about that. But it was. It had always been about that. About the invisible scaffolding no one sees until someone threatens to remove it. He reached the page I knew he'd stall on. The formal letterhead at the top made it unmistakable. My attorney's name. The title, Notice of Intent to Withdraw Personal Guarantee. He froze. The restaurant, once filled with ambient music and the low hum of refrigeration, felt utterly silent. Even the kitchen seemed to hold its breath. You can't be serious, he said, but it came out thin, like air escaping a puncture. I am, I said. My mother's chair scraped slightly as she shifted. Emily, what does that mean? It means, I said carefully, choosing each word so no one could twist them later, that I've notified the bank I intend to remove myself as a personal guarantor on the expansion loan. My father's face drained of color. If you do that, they'll reevaluate the entire agreement. Yes, I answered. They will. David slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing off brick and glass. You'd destroy the restaurant over this? I'm not destroying anything, I replied. I'm stepping out of it. That's the same thing, he shouted. It wasn't. And that was the part he couldn't accept. For years, my presence had functioned as insurance. My name reduced interest rates. My credit reassured lenders. My income stabilized projections. I wasn't just emotional support, I was structural support. And he knew it. If you withdraw, he continued, voice rising, they could call the loan. They could force renegotiation. Do you understand what that would do to me? To Mom and Dad? The irony nearly stole my breath. You held a vote about my existence at this table, I said calmly. And you're asking if I understand consequences? He stared at me like I'd betrayed him in some irreversible way. This is blackmail, he accused. No, I said again, steady. Blackmail is threatening something illegal to get compliance. I'm exercising a legal right to protect myself. That distinction mattered. Not just legally, morally. My father pressed his fingers to his temples. This has gone too far. Had it? Or had it simply reached the part no one could ignore anymore? I turned slightly toward him. Dad, if the business is strong, it will survive a review. If it's not, then my name is the only thing keeping it afloat. And that's not stability. That's dependence. David pushed back from the table and stood, pacing once before stopping near the bar. He ran his hands through his hair the way he always did when panic crept in. I'd seen that gesture before late-night calls, whispered emergencies, moments when he wasn't the confident owner in magazine interviews but a man terrified of losing control. You always do this, he said, turning toward me. You twist things into some moral lesson where you're the rational one, and I'm reckless. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. I'm not twisting anything, I said softly. I'm clarifying. There's a difference. He pointed at the folder. You built this like a prosecutor. No, I replied. I built it like someone who realized her memory was being rewritten. That hit him. I saw it. Because that was the real fracture between us. Every time we argued about money, he'd say I was exaggerating, that I liked to play savior, that no one had asked me to sacrifice. But sacrifice without acknowledgement turns into resentment. And resentment, left alone long enough, hardens into something colder. My sister finally spoke, her voice trembling. Is there really no other way to fix this? I looked at her, at the conflict in her eyes. I offered other ways, I said. I offered to restructure debt. I offered to step back gradually. I asked for boundaries. David laughed sharply. Boundaries? You mean rules? Yes, I said. Rules, the kind that prevent emergencies from becoming lifestyle. He stared at me as if I'd switched languages. Because in his world, risk was boldness, expansion was ambition, debt was temporary. In mine, risk was measurable. Expansion required contingency. Debt required discipline. Neither of us was evil. But only one of us had been carrying both philosophies at once. If you send that letter, he said slowly, you're choosing money over family. I felt the sting of that, even though I knew it was simplistic. I'm choosing accountability over illusion, I answered. And I'm choosing not to anchor my future to decisions I don't control. The words surprised even me, not because they weren't true, but because I'd never said them out loud before. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I know, I said gently. And I did know. They hadn't gathered tonight intending cruelty. They thought they were correcting my distance, reclaiming their version of closeness. They believed pressure would pull me back into orbit. They didn't expect me to remove gravity entirely. David walked back to the table and placed both hands on it, leaning forward. His voice was lower now, almost pleading beneath the anger. If you do this, everything changes. I held his gaze. It already did, I said. The moment you voted me out, you changed the rules. The folder sat between us. No longer just paper, but a line. Not a weapon. A boundary. And as David's eyes dropped once more to the letterhead, the formal, impersonal language that made everything undeniable, I understood something with startling clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was me, stepping out of a structure that only stood because I kept holding it up. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen when I let go. For a few seconds after I said, "It already did," no one spoke. The silence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was uncomfortable and human. The kind of silence where everyone suddenly becomes aware of the small sounds, the hum of the refrigerators behind the bar, the faint ticking of a wall clock, someone's uneven breathing. David slowly lowered himself back into his chair. The anger hadn't disappeared from his face, but it had shifted. It was no longer explosive. It was calculating. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he muttered. There it was. The sentence I had heard in different forms my entire life. "You're too sensitive. You're making it bigger than it is. You're overthinking." It used to work. It used to make me pause and question myself. Maybe I was too intense. Maybe I did keep mental scorecards. Maybe I expected too much acknowledgement. But that night, with the folder still open between us, the sentence didn't land the way it used to. "I'm responding proportionally," I said quietly. "You voted me out of the family," my father exhaled sharply. "We didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" I asked, not aggressively, just genuinely curious. He hesitated. My mother answered instead. "We thought if we made it clear how distant you've become, you'd realize how much this hurts us," she said. "We wanted you to see the consequences." The word consequences almost made me laugh. "So you decided to show me what it would feel like to be excluded," I said. "To scare me into—" "What, trying harder?" David leaned forward again. "You've pulled away, Emily. You barely come over anymore. You don't answer every call. You don't stay late. You act like you're doing us a favor just by showing up." I held his gaze. "Do you ever wonder why I pulled away?" He didn't respond. "Because every interaction started to feel like a transaction," I continued. Every "how are you" was followed by "can you?" Every dinner ended with a financial update I didn't ask for but was somehow responsible to fix. "That's not fair," he snapped. "It's accurate," I replied. Lily shifted in her seat, her voice soft. "We didn't realize it felt like that." I looked at her, and for a second, the tension eased. Lily has always been the peacemaker, the one who absorbs discomfort in silence. "I know," I said, "because I didn't let it show. I thought if I was strong enough, calm enough, generous enough, eventually it would balance out." "And it didn't?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "It became expected." That word hung heavier than any dollar amount in the folder. "Expected." My father rubbed his forehead. "We raised you to be responsible," he said. "To look out for family." "You did," I agreed. "And I took that seriously. I just didn't realize it meant carrying more than my share indefinitely." David's jaw tightened. "You make it sound like we exploited you." I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it outright would change the temperature of the room completely. "I think," I said carefully, "you got used to me being the safety net." He scoffed. "So what? We're not allowed to need you?" "You're allowed to need me," I replied. "You're not entitled to me." The distinction seemed to frustrate him more than anything else, I'd said. "Family doesn't keep score," he shot back. "I agree," I said. "Family also doesn't hold votes." That stopped him. For a moment, his eyes flicked toward our parents, then back to me. And in that brief glance, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just anger, embarrassment. Because now, with the financial evidence laid out and the legal notice looming, the vote looked smaller, petty, even. A theatrical move that didn't account for consequences. "You could have talked to us," my mother whispered. "I tried," I said softly. "And I meant that." I thought about the conversation in David's office a month earlier. The empty beer bottle between us, the late hour, the way I had told him I couldn't wire another 20,000 without restructuring things properly. He'd laughed then, not kindly. "You'd never let us sink," he'd said. At the time, the statement had felt like faith. Now I understood it for what it was. Assumption. You said I was trying to buy the right to be difficult, I reminded him quietly. Do you remember that? His eyes flickered, and that was answer enough. That hurt, I continued. Not because of the money, because it turned every sacrifice into manipulation in your version of the story. The room felt smaller again. My father shifted in his chair. We just feel like you've become colder. I considered that. Maybe I have, I admitted. When you keep putting out fires, you either burn out or you cool down. David laughed without humor. You talk like this is some business seminar. That's because I finally started applying business logic to my personal life, I said. In business, if a system keeps failing, you analyze the structure. You don't blame the person who keeps fixing it. And what are we? He challenged. A failing system? I met his eyes steadily. We were a system built on the assumption that I would always absorb the impact. That wasn't cruelty, it was architecture. Lily's eyes filled with tears. So if you walk away, what happens to us? The question wasn't about money. It was about identity. For years, I had been the steady one, the practical one, the one who didn't panic. If I stepped back, they'd have to confront uncertainty without me smoothing the edges. You adapt, I said gently. The way adults do. David shook his head. You think you're stronger than us. I think I'm done carrying more than my part, I replied. There was a difference. My mother reached across the table again, her fingers trembling slightly. We never wanted you to feel used. I know, I said, and I did know that. They didn't wake up thinking, let's drain Emily today. It was subtler than that. It was convenience layered over time. It was relief every time I said yes. It was the way gratitude faded faster than need. You hurt me on purpose tonight, I added quietly. You hurt me to prove that you were hurting. My father closed his eyes briefly. David's voice lowered. We just wanted you back. I felt something twist in my chest at that. I was never gone, I said. I just stopped saying yes automatically. Silence again. The folder still lay open between us, the attorney's letter visible like a line no one wanted to cross. What do you want? My father finally asked, his voice tired. An apology? I thought about that. An apology would feel good in the moment. It would smooth the air. Let everyone breathe. But apologies without change are just pauses before repetition. I want acknowledgement, I said slowly. Not of the money, of the pattern. I want you to admit that I became useful before I was valued. No one answered immediately. David's eyes dropped to the table. Lily looked between us like she was trying to memorize this moment. My mother pressed her lips together. The truth didn't explode the way anger does. It didn't shatter glass or slam doors. It just sat there, heavy and undeniable. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to make it lighter for them. I wasn't minimizing it. I wasn't softening it. I was letting it exist. And that, more than the letter, more than the money, more than the vote, was what truly unsettled them. Because if I could sit with the discomfort without rushing to fix it, then maybe they would have to sit with it too. The air in the restaurant had shifted from confrontation to something heavier, like the moment before a storm finally breaks or dissolves. No one was yelling now. No one was clapping. The dramatic energy that had filled the room when David announced the vote had drained away, replaced by something far less comfortable. Reality. David stared at the folder, as if it might still betray him somehow. As if another page might flip itself open and reveal something even worse. I could see his mind moving, calculating outcomes, running scenarios. He had always been quick like that, not with spreadsheets, but with narratives. He knew how to frame things, how to rally sympathy, how to turn setbacks into stories of grit and resilience. But numbers don't rally. They don't bend. They don't care about charisma. You're really going to send it? He asked finally, nodding toward the attorney's letter. Yes, I said. The word was quiet, firm, final. My mother inhaled sharply. Emily, once that happens, there's no undoing it. I looked at her, and for a moment I felt the old instinct again. The one that tells you to soften your edges for the sake of peace. To say, maybe we can delay it. Maybe we can revisit this. Maybe we can figure something out. But I had delayed before. I had revisited before. I had figured things out again and again and again. That's the point, I replied gently. There needs to be a line. David pushed his chair back and stood again. But this time, there was no theatrical scrape, no performance, just restless energy. You know what this looks like? He said. It looks like you waited until you had leverage and then used it. I considered that. I waited until I realized I didn't have to keep offering it, I answered. That's the same thing. No, I said, shaking my head. Leverage is something you hold over someone to control them. Boundaries are something you put in place to protect yourself. He ran a hand over his face. You could have just said no. I did, I reminded him. The memory hung between us, me in his office a month ago, explaining that I couldn't continue absorbing last-minute cash flow crises without structural changes. Explaining that if I was going to be attached legally to the business, I needed transparency and accountability. He'd laughed then. You always make it so dramatic, he'd said. Now here we were. This isn't about drama, I continued. It's about sustainability. For years, the restaurant didn't just depend on revenue, it depended on me. That's not true, he shot back automatically. I didn't argue. I simply looked at the numbers in the folder. He looked too. Silence again. My father spoke quietly this time. If the bank reassesses, they might force a restructure. They might bring in new terms. Yes, I said. They might. And if David can't meet them? I met his gaze steadily. Then he adjusts. The word adjust felt foreign in this room. In our family, the person who adjusted was always me. I adjusted my schedule, my savings, my expectations, my boundaries. This time, I wasn't the one adapting. David let out a bitter laugh. So you're just going to walk away and watch us struggle? I felt that accusation deep in my chest. Not because it was accurate, but because it touched the part of me that had always equated love with rescue. I'm not walking away from you, I said carefully. I'm walking away from being financially responsible for choices I don't make. He stared at me like that distinction was absurd. That's not how family works, he muttered. How does it work? I asked quietly. No one answered. My sister finally spoke, her voice unsteady. I think we got used to you fixing things. And when you stopped, it felt like rejection. I turned toward her. That's fair, I said. But me not fixing everything isn't the same as abandoning you. David shook his head. You always frame it like we're villains. I don't think you're villains, I replied. I think you're comfortable. That hit harder than I expected it to. Comfortable with calling me at midnight. Comfortable with assuming I'd wire money without conditions. Comfortable with believing that if things got bad enough, I would absorb the damage. Comfort can look a lot like care from the inside, until the person carrying it collapses. You know what scares you? I asked David quietly. It's not the bank, it's not the loan, it's losing control of the story. He frowned. You've told everyone for years that I'm distant, cold, judgmental, the corporate sister who doesn't understand what it takes to run a real business. But this, I gestured lightly toward the folder, shows something else. It shows numbers, he snapped. It shows pattern, I corrected. And patterns are hard to argue with. My mother wiped at her eyes. We thought you liked being the strong one. I swallowed. I liked feeling useful, I admitted. There's a difference. Being useful earns appreciation. Being used erodes it. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension had shifted again, not explosive, not defensive, but reflective. What if we reverse the vote? My father said suddenly. What if we just say it was stupid? That we overreacted? I almost smiled at the simplicity of that. You can't unring a bell, I said softly. You can't vote someone out and then pretend the act didn't mean anything. David leaned both hands on the table, looking directly at me. So what? You want us to beg? No, I said immediately. I want you to understand. Understand what? That I won't stay in a system where my value is tied to what I provide. The words felt steady coming out of me. Not rehearsed, not sharp, just true. You're acting like we don't love you, my mother whispered. I know you love me, I said. But love without respect turns into expectation, and expectation without gratitude turns into entitlement. David's face tightened. That's harsh. So was the vote, I replied. The room went still again. I could feel something final settling inside me, not anger, not even sadness, but resolve. For years, I had hoped that if I just explained myself clearly enough, calmly enough, they would see what I saw, that they would meet me halfway without crisis forcing the conversation. But sometimes, clarity only comes when the safety net disappears. You really think we can survive without you? David asked, softer now. I held his gaze. Yes, I said, not because I wanted them to struggle, but because I believed they were more capable than they'd allowed themselves to be. The world doesn't collapse just because one person stops absorbing impact. It adjusts. And maybe that was the part I had to trust. David looked down at the folder one last time. At the totals. At the transcripts. At the legal letter that marked the end of a decade-long pattern. You've changed, he said quietly. Maybe I had. Or maybe I had just stopped pretending I hadn't. I'm still your sister, I said. I'm just not your guarantee. And in that moment, more than the numbers, more than the paperwork, more than the vote itself, that was the truth that reshaped everything. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just the refusal to keep being the foundation of a structure that refused to acknowledge I was holding it up. After I said, I'm still your sister, I'm just not your guarantee, something shifted in the room again, but this time it wasn't explosive or defensive. It was quieter, almost fragile. Like everyone was standing at the edge of something they hadn't expected to reach tonight. David didn't argue immediately. He didn't throw another accusation at me. He just stood there, staring at the folder, as if it had rewritten more than just the numbers. As if it had rewritten who he thought I was. For years, I had been predictable, reliable, the steady one, the calm voice at the other end of the phone saying, "Okay, let's fix it." I never slammed doors. I never made ultimatums. I didn't threaten. I absorbed. Tonight, I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted anyone. I hadn't even called them out with cruelty. I had simply stopped offering myself as collateral. You think walking away makes you strong? David asked finally, but there was less bite in it now. I think staying when you're no longer respected makes you smaller, I replied. The words weren't rehearsed. They surprised me as much as anyone else. But once spoken, they felt undeniable. My father leaned back in his chair, his shoulders sagging in a way that made him look older than he had an hour ago. When you were a kid, he said slowly, you were always the one who took care of your sister, made sure she had her homework done, walked her home from school. I nodded faintly. I remembered that. I remembered tying Lily's shoelaces and carrying her backpack when it was too heavy. I remembered thinking that being responsible was the same thing as being loved. We raised you to be loyal, he continued. You did, I said. And I am. David gave a sharp, humorless laugh. This is loyalty? Yes, I said, meeting his eyes. Loyalty isn't the same as self-erasure. That sentence hung in the air like a line drawn in permanent ink. For so long, I had confused endurance with devotion. I thought that if I could tolerate enough stress, enough imbalance, enough quiet resentment, it meant I was committed. It meant I was the good one. But commitment without boundaries becomes quiet self-abandonment. You're choosing yourself over us, David said, softer now. I'm choosing myself alongside you, I corrected. Just not underneath you. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever had. My mother's voice trembled. We never meant for you to feel underneath. I know, I said gently. But impact matters more than intention. That was something I had learned at work. A company can intend to value its employees and still create a system that burns them out. Good intentions don't cancel harmful patterns. Lily wiped at her eyes. If you send the letter, and the bank pushes back, everything could change. Yes, I said. It could. And you're okay with that? The question was genuine, not accusatory. She wasn't asking about money. She was asking about identity, about the version of our family she had grown up believing was unbreakable. I'm not okay with everything staying the same, I answered. David shook his head slowly. You always think you see things clearer than the rest of us. No, I said quietly. I just stopped pretending I didn't see them. There's a difference between arrogance and awareness. For years, I had downplayed my own perception to keep the peace. If something felt off, I told myself I was overthinking. If something felt unfair, I told myself I was being dramatic. Tonight, I wasn't shrinking my perception to make others comfortable. "You're making this about control," David muttered. "In a way, it is," I admitted. "But not the way you think," he frowned. "For 10 years," I continued, "I had responsibility without authority. I was liable without being included in decisions. I was expected to step in, but not to question structure. That's not partnership. That's dependency." My father's eyes lifted at that. He understood that language better than David did. He had spent his career in operations. He knew what it meant when accountability and authority were misaligned. "You never asked to be included," he said. "I did," I replied calmly. "You called it interference." Silence again. The restaurant felt different now. Less like a battlefield. More like a dismantled stage after the audience has gone home, and the lights are still too bright. David looked tired. Not angry tired. As if something inside him had finally registered that this wasn't a bluff. That I wasn't posturing. That I wasn't trying to win. I was stepping out. "You're not going to change your mind," he said quietly. "No," I answered. He swallowed hard. "And if everything falls apart?" I held his gaze. "Then you rebuild," I said. "The way adults do, when they can't rely on someone else to catch them." That stung him. I saw it, but it wasn't cruelty. It was truth. For years, I had been the emergency exit, the contingency plan, the backup parachute. But parachutes are not meant to be worn permanently. My mother pressed a napkin to her lips. "I don't want this to be how we remember tonight." I didn't either. I hadn't walked into the restaurant hoping to detonate something. I had hoped naively, maybe that the vote was impulsive, that once confronted with the reality of what I had carried, they would understand without resistance. But understanding is rarely immediate when pride is involved. "I don't want to lose you," Lily whispered. "You're not losing me," I said softly. "You're losing access to the version of me that never said no." David leaned forward again, but this time, his voice wasn't sharp, it was raw. "I needed you," he said. That sentence nearly undid me. Because that was the truth underneath all of it, not manipulation, not strategy. Need. "I know," I replied. "And now?" he asked. "Now you need to need yourself," I said. It sounded harsher than I intended, but I didn't retract it. Growth isn't gentle. For a moment, I imagined the alternative. Me sliding the folder back into my bag, saying, "Forget it, I'll hold off on the letter." Watching everyone exhale in relief, hugging, promising to communicate better. And then, 6 months from now, another late-night call, another emergency, another quiet transfer. The pattern would reset, and this conversation would become a family story about that dramatic night Emily almost left. I couldn't do that again. "I won't disappear," I said carefully. "I won't cut contact. I'm not erasing you from my life." "But you're changing the terms," David said. Yes, that was the simplest truth of the night. I wasn't severing blood. I was redefining boundaries. And boundaries feel like betrayal to people who benefited from your lack of them. My father finally spoke again, his voice low and steady. "You really believe this is the only way?" I met his eyes. "I believe it's the only way I don't become someone I resent," I said. That was the quiet fear I hadn't named until now. Not losing them. Not financial fallout. Becoming bitter. Becoming the sister who smiles at holidays, but keeps score silently. I refused to be that version of myself. The folder lay closed now, but its presence lingered. Not as a weapon, not as a threat, as a declaration. And as David stood there, looking at me not like an opponent but like someone he no longer fully recognized, I realized something profound. He wasn't just losing a guarantor. He was losing the illusion that I would always carry more than my share. And maybe, just maybe, that loss was the beginning of something healthier for both of us. For a long moment, no one spoke after I said that maybe this loss was the beginning of something healthier. The word healthier seemed almost out of place in that room, surrounded by hurt pride and unfinished arguments. It sounded too calm for the emotional wreckage scattered across the table. David sank back into his chair slowly, like the fight had finally leaked out of him. He didn't look like the confident restaurant owner from the magazine covers on the wall. He looked like my brother, the one who used to build blanket forts in the living room and swear he'd own a place like this someday. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You're serious," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "Yes," I replied. The word didn't shake. My mother looked between us like she was watching something unravel that she didn't know how to stitch back together. "If you walk out now," she whispered, "what if things never go back to how they were?" I felt that question in my chest. It carried years of birthdays, holidays, shared meals, laughter that didn't involve spreadsheets or bank transfers, the comfort of routine, the illusion of permanence. "How they were is what brought us here," I said gently. That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For a second, no one breathed. Then my father leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped. "When you need us," he said, and there was something sharp in his tone now, something defensive. "Don't forget who was there for you when you were young." The sentence landed harder than anything else that night. I held his gaze. "I won't," I said. "And I won't forget who was there for me when I became an adult, either." Silence again. It wasn't that they had never loved me. They had. In their way. In the way families often do, through effort, sacrifice, shared struggle. But somewhere along the way, that love became lopsided. I became the strong one, and the strong one doesn't get to fall apart. The strong one doesn't get to say, "This is too much." David rubbed his face with both hands, exhaling sharply. "You think walking away makes you powerful." "No," I said. "It makes me honest." He let out a hollow laugh. "You're choosing money over blood." I almost smiled at how simple he needed the narrative to be. "No," I answered. "I'm choosing accountability over denial. I'm choosing not to tie my future to decisions I don't control." The folder sat closed in front of me now. The pages inside had already done their work. There was no need to reopen them. Lily reached across the table and grabbed my wrist suddenly, her fingers cold. "Please don't let this be the story of us," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and for the first time that night, my composure wavered. "It's not the end," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "It's just the part where I stop playing a role that's hurting me." She shook her head. "What if it becomes permanent?" "I don't know what permanent looks like," I admitted. "But I know what continuing like this looks like. And that's something I can't do anymore." David stood again, but there was no theatrics left. No raised voice. Just a man trying to hold on to something that was already slipping. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "Friends come and go. Business changes. We're your only real family." There it was, the final card. The guilt grenade. "You'll be alone without us." For years, that fear had kept me compliant. The idea that without family, you float untethered. But something had shifted inside me tonight. The idea no longer terrified me the way it used to. "Family isn't a trump card," I said calmly. "It's a relationship, and relationships require mutual respect." David stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. My mother's eyes were red now. "We didn't expect this," she said. "Neither did I replied. I hadn't walked into the restaurant planning to detonate anything. I had come hoping for conversation. Maybe a little tension, maybe some uncomfortable honesty. Not a vote, not applause at my exclusion. "You hurt me on purpose," I said quietly. "You hurt me to prove that you were hurting." No one denied it. That was answer enough. I pushed my chair back slowly. The sound was softer than David's earlier scrape, but it felt heavier. "Emily," my father said, standing halfway as if unsure whether to follow or stop me. "I love you," I said, looking at all of them in turn. "But I won't keep paying the bill for choices you're not willing to own." My voice surprised me. It didn't tremble. It didn't break. David shook his head. "You think you're so strong." "No," I said. "I think I'm finally tired." That was the most honest thing I'd said all night. Tired of being the safety net. Tired of being the adult in every crisis. Tired of explaining why boundaries aren't cruelty. Lily stood now too, tears streaming freely. "Call me," she said. I will, I promised. Because this wasn't about cutting everyone off. It was about cutting off the version of me that believed love required self-erasure. I picked up the folder. It felt lighter than when I had walked in, even though nothing inside had changed. The difference was simple. I wasn't holding it for them anymore. I was holding it for myself. As I stepped toward the door, the restaurant lights seemed too warm, too golden, like they were trying to preserve a moment that had already ended. I didn't look back at the table. I didn't check whether anyone followed. Right before I reached the door, I paused not for them, but for myself. If your family stood up at dinner and voted you out, I said quietly, almost to the air, would you stay and keep proving your loyalty? Or would you finally walk away? No one answered. Maybe they couldn't. I opened the door and stepped outside. The night air hit my face, cool and steady. The noise of the street, distant cars, faint music from another bar felt almost grounding after the intensity inside. I expected to feel rage, or grief, or even triumph. Instead, I felt something quieter. Relief. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out. But for the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders wasn't a shared burden disguised as love. It was mine, and that made all the difference. I walked to my car slowly, each step deliberate. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Behind me, through the restaurant windows, I could see silhouettes, still sitting at the table, still processing, still absorbing. The vote had been theirs. The decision to leave had been mine. And somewhere between those two moments, I stopped being the guarantor of everyone else's stability and started becoming responsible for my own. 6 months after that night, I was sitting in a small, sunlit office that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, staring at my name on a frosted glass door. Emily Parker Consulting. Financial Boundaries and Recovery. If you had told me a year earlier that I would leave my corporate job, start my own firm, and build something out of the wreckage of one family dinner, I would have laughed. I was risk-averse, strategic, careful. I built contingency plans for a living. But when you stop using all your energy to hold everyone else up, you realize how much you've been carrying. And when you set that weight down, you suddenly have both hands free. The first few weeks after I walked out of the restaurant were harder than I expected. The adrenaline faded. The silence settled in. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, expecting a crisis text from David. Payroll short, vendor upset, loan officer asking questions. None came. Not because things were fine, because for the first time, they weren't my problem to fix. The attorney sent the formal notice the following Monday, exactly as planned. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask him to hold off. I didn't just give it a week. That was the part I'm most proud of, if I'm honest. Not the folder, not the confrontation, the follow-through. The bank responded quickly. They requested updated financials, revised projections, and clarification on the restaurant's restructuring plan. I wasn't copied on those emails anymore. That was intentional. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. They got the notice from the bank. David is furious. Mom is panicking. Dad is finally asking questions he should have asked years ago. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Old habits don't die quietly. They whisper. You could smooth this over. You could call the loan officer. You could explain context. You could fix it. Just one more time. My fingers hovered over the phone. Another message came through before I typed anything. I'm not texting you to fix it. I just thought you should know. It's ugly, but it's theirs. I exhaled slowly. That sentence mattered more than she probably realized. It's ugly, but it's theirs. That was the shift. For years, every ugly thing had become mine. I typed back, "How are you?" Her response came quickly. "I miss you." That one hurt. Because I missed her too. I missed the easy parts. The parts that didn't involve money or tension. I missed being able to walk into the restaurant without scanning the room for unspoken expectations. But missing someone isn't the same as needing to undo your boundaries. I replied, "I miss you too. We can talk. Just us, no agendas." There was a pause before her next message. "I've been watching videos about boundaries. People keep saying you can love someone and still choose yourself. I didn't understand that before. I think I'm starting to. I sat back in my chair, blinking at the screen. For the first time since the dinner, I felt something that wasn't tension or relief. I felt hope. Not the naive kind that imagines everything will go back to how it was. The grounded kind that believes things can be different. A few months later, I heard through Lily and a cousin who still followed me online that the bank had renegotiated the restaurant's loan. Not gently, not easily. They required significant restructuring. David had to sell a majority share to new investors to stabilize cash flow and reduce personal liability. He kept a smaller percentage. He was still involved, but he wasn't in control anymore. My parents sold their larger house and moved into something more manageable. There were arguments. There were hard conversations. There were nights where I'm sure they wondered how things had spiraled so far. But here's the part no one talks about enough. The world did not end. They didn't starve. They didn't collapse without my credit score. They survived. And so did I. Healing wasn't cinematic. There was no triumphant montage. There were quiet evenings where I stared at my ceiling and wondered if I had overreacted. Holidays that felt emptier. Photos I wasn't in. But there were also new dinners. New friends. Clients who sat across from me and said, I didn't realize how much I was carrying until I stopped. I left my corporate job 2 months after that dinner. Not out of rage. Not out of impulse. Out of clarity. I realized I had built a career out of fixing other people's financial chaos, while quietly living my own emotional one. Starting my firm wasn't revenge. It was alignment. The first client who walked through my door was a woman in her 40s who had co-signed 3 loans for relatives and was terrified to say no to a fourth. She sat in my office, twisting her hands, and said, "If I don't help them, what does that say about me?" I smiled gently and said, "It says you're human." That night at the restaurant had taught me something I hadn't understood before. Blood is powerful, but it's not permission. You can love people deeply and still refuse to subsidize their denial. You can miss someone and still maintain distance. You can be loyal without being limitless. About a year after the vote, Lily and I met for coffee. Just us. No restaurant, no long table, no audience. She looked different, softer, stronger. They talk about you less now, she said carefully. Not because they don't care, but because they've had to focus on their own adjustments. And David? I asked. She shrugged slightly. He's different, quieter. He doesn't call me for money advice anymore. He hired an actual financial advisor. That made me laugh softly. Progress doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like independence. We didn't resolve everything that day. We didn't rewrite the past, but we talked, really talked, without anyone needing to win. Before we left the cafe, Lily looked at me and said, I didn't understand why you left. I thought you were abandoning us. Now I think you were refusing to abandon yourself. That sentence stayed with me. I didn't stop being a daughter or a sister the night I walked out of that restaurant. They stopped being my emergency exit. And when that happened, I built a new one for myself. Sometimes I still drive past the restaurant. The sign has changed slightly. New branding, new investors. The lights are still warm. The table's still full. It doesn't ache the way it used to. Because I finally understand something that took me 33 years to learn. Family is not a membership you can revoke by vote. It's a relationship you maintain by choice. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself without apology. What this story was never really about was money. It wasn't even about the vote. It was about what happens when love becomes obligation, when loyalty turns into silent self-erasure, and when the strong one finally decides she doesn't want to be strong at the cost of herself anymore. The folder wasn't a weapon. The letter wasn't revenge. They were boundaries clear, documented, and long overdue. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight louder or prove more. It's to step back and let people carry what was always theirs to carry. If you've ever been the responsible one, the fixer, the quiet safety net in your family, then you know how heavy that role can become. And if this story felt familiar, if it made you pause and question your own boundaries, then you're not alone. Stories like this matter because they remind us that choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving others. It means you stop abandoning yourself. If you want more stories about growth, family, hard truths, and quiet strength, subscribe to Revenge Truth Vault. We tell the stories that stay with you long after the table is cleared.